Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. My guest is an assistant professor at the Department of Applied Psychology at Rutgers University, accomplished author, and I have his book and read it here, very nice. It's a mindfulness workbook for beginners. He's a podcaster, which I always enjoy, and a sports psychologist. He's from outside of New York. Please welcome Dr. Pete Economou.
Perfect.
Did I do it?
Perfect. You did great. Hey, Roy.
Hi. All right. I suppose let's start off with your surname. Because it sounds to me, when I just look at it, it sounds kind of like Romanian.
Yeah, it's Greek.
Greek, okay.
It's Greek. Yep, very Greek. So it's a pretty common name actually in Greece, but a lot of other people around the world have challenges with it.
Okay. So, I mean, I briefly kind of mentioned about kind of what you're at, but you might just kind of let the listeners know. Who's Dr. Pete?
Yeah, so I love blending science, with, I always say that like psychology is an art, so there's a lot of objective science that's kind of, contributing to the decisions that we're making or how people behave. But the art of it is like just sitting with someone suffering and just trying to understand where there are. So I am both, a licensed psychologist. I work with high performers. I'm a professor, so I teach other students how to do this, but also, conduct research in the area of performance, and all the other things, like, brother, son, partner, just living life, and this thing that we do called life. Sometimes my athletes say life is lifing.
Okay. And like, I suppose usually people kind of do one route or the other. They rarely combine them, which is why this is kind of an interesting one for me. So, like, I suppose, how did you start yourself? Was it more studying, or did you get into mindfulness meditation at an early age? I'd like to know how it all began for you.
Yeah, well, I was a competitive swimmer. So we're, currently in the season of the Olympics, and it was every 4 years, it was cool that I was a swimmer. In between, I was, usually made fun of because we wear Speedos and it's not the most manly sport, right? But it's been so as a swimmer, I recognized the stress. Actually, one of my events was the 200 butterfly. And when I first started swimming it, I would get so nervous that I would actually throw up before I raced. And that's not uncommon for some people.
I've heard people say that as well,
yeah. Yeah, it's not that uncommon, but, during that time, I thought, wow, that's a lot of energy, like to go to the bathroom, to be so worried about when it was going to happen. But it became just like habitual. I would just go to the bathroom, throw up really quick, and then come back and feel better and get behind the block and race. So that was probably where like the first little seed got planted. And then during the remainder of my career, I started to water that seed where I recognized I needed to find ways to relax so I could preserve that energy. And so the preservation of that energy meant I was actually listening to calm, soothing meditation, like Enigma. Many listeners will probably know that Enigma is very international. So in the 90s, Enigma was very big, and that's what I would be listening to behind the blocks. And then it turned out I would actually start yawning behind the blocks. And then, I went on to compete at Olympic trials and Big East champion and, had all these sort of accolades, but I did start to perform better. But it wasn't until grad school that I was able to really understand what it was. And that's when I met my Zen teacher. During grad school, I met Robert Kennedy Roshi, who is both a Jesuit priest and a Zen teacher. And so I started studying with him in around 2009. And, the rest is history. I've just been able to kind of integrate these two things together, performance, psychology, and meditation.
When you're swimming, there's something I'm curious, like, because I mean, you went at a high level and not a high performance level. And like when people are training or whether you're, like sometimes people are doing hours lengths.
Yes.
What's going on in your head? Are you counting? Are you thinking like, because to be honest, I could never do that. And I know lots of people do it. I'm the type, I'll swim 2 lengths and I'll just chill out. I put my hands there. But what goes on? Like, what are you thinking? Or is that your form of meditation as you're swimming?
Yeah. You're sitting there on the side waiting for someone to like serve you a drink or something, probably. It's a really good question because actually I remember my biology teacher. So I studied biology first in college, which is why I started like to understand the brain a little bit. And she would say to me, she was like, Dr. Shi, I remember like this conversation because there were not a ton of swimmers that were athletes studying biology, because it's, a lot of times athletes will maybe choose a little less, stringent or less difficult major. And so I would just go to office hours and be like, okay, I'm really struggling with this material. And she said to me, she's like, well, you're swimming for, 4 hours a day. Why can't you study the material in your head while you're swimming? And it was like a good idea. And I actually, if I remember correctly, I think she herself swam at that, so at a leisurely or sort of exercise level, that might make sense. At a competitive level, it'd be like, asking, maybe a baseball player, football player, like what they're thinking about, when they're throwing a ball or catching a ball. I mean, all eyes are on the ball. They have to be focused to catch the ball. They have to be focused to pitch the ball. So it's similar with swimming. So it's a lot of attention. And so I think it's sort of ironic that then I became the sports psychologist because swimming can be very lonely. While it's a team sport, it's just you in the lane. American Katie Ledecky gave a shout out, to a lot of her swimming partners in Florida, that she trained with, a lot of men, I think, Nick Fink. And so even though you're training with these people, it's not like you're talking, like you really can't talk, you're just pushing each other without any words. So it's a very lonely sport. And, there's times, especially at that level, where you're in a lot of pain too. So I do think I learned probably mindfulness without knowing that's what it was at a very early age, just from the swimming. So I'll answer the question now. What you're thinking about is, whatever the set is, maybe if you're working on sprinting or sort of conditioning, you're trying to pace yourself perhaps, until the next set, or you're thinking about, your goals in that moment. But also the way the brain works, I may also be thinking about a fight that I had with a partner or with my coach, or, a dinner that I'm worried about that night, so you will be thinking about life. But the goal is to kind of come back to whatever it is that you're doing right at hand.
Okay, excellent. And with the Zen Master then, because, like some people, they don't know what Zen is. It's like it's being at one or whatever. So you might explain exactly what he was doing and what you've learned from him.
So the Zen Master, Zen Buddhism is just one school of Buddhism. And so he's from the white plum lineage, whatever that means, because I think all these things get very power driven in a way, I'm going to say, because everyone wants their identity or their sort of stamp on it, which to me is counterintuitive. The very basic idea of Buddhism is foundationally based on the Four Noble Truths, which is that, everyone suffers. Suffering is created by attachment. The Eightfold Path helps people release attachment, and then enlightenment. If only it were that simple. But, so my Zen teacher kind of just has taught me through koans is one way that you learn. So if any listeners know, a koan is like a Zen teaching that is abstract. And I think the goal is to really unlearn. We're such learned beings that we're so conditioned that if we hear any words, we're trying to put those words into some context that makes sense for me on my experience versus just non-judgmentally and experientially. So that's a lot of words. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, it kind of, with the mental health and stuff like that, and you being a professor, because unfortunately, a lot of people, I've got friends professors, and it's like a lot of times a professor is taught a certain way and they read the same literature and they cannot change their mind, which was baffling, especially with what kind of went on recently. And you're kind of, even if you give information, whereas I think with the route that you took, you look at everything with open eyes and you go, this is my thought belief today, but based on new information, I can change it. And I presume even at the university, you're probably seeing that and kind of, do you find it baffling when you see people that just kind of have a one-horse pony kind of mindset?
Roy, you said that just so beautifully. It is probably one of my, I feel like it's like my karma, or it's my work, is to help people. We call it cognitive or psychological flexibility. And not, it's a skill that most people don't have, especially those that are professing. To your point, they one trick pony, and it's really problematic because then no one is listening. Everyone's just speaking and no one's listening, and that's a problem. And with the practice of meditation and mindfulness, you first start by listening to yourself. You sit for hours alone on your cushion in silence, or with a community. So you learn about your internal self and that dialogue, but then you're also trained to then listen, through that. And so I think mindfulness has really, cultivated this listening practice in myself, which I think I'm so thankful for, because, I never, and maybe some of my students would actually disagree with this, but I never want to be right or the loudest person in the room. Like, I want to encourage people to speak and to have their opinion, and to be able to share it. What I know is what I know, but that doesn't mean it's the only known. Yeah.
No, because it was actually one of my guests earlier on had debunked something that was, people were, I even forget about it. I think it was something about the hours that people used and then how successful they were later. A Harvard study, by the way. And it never existed. And I heard, you've the likes of Brian Tracy and different people like that regurgitating this, which in turn then gets millions of people saying the exact same thing. And it's so dangerous that, and now people intentionally put stuff out that we grasp and just assume. So, I suppose this is one for a person that studies on both sides. How do you know what's true? Because even with that, we're exposing, fraud and corruption on one of my podcasts, and we've live, and all of us, we know a lot more than most people because we've went so deep into things that you couldn't even fathom is going on. We don't even know what's real. We're saying, we're so careful because we have to be careful who we bring on, and we're also careful of what we're talking about because people are going to jump on you straight away. And I just wonder for you, how do you know what's actually true?
I mean, that is such a good question, and it's scary, isn't it, Roy? It's scary to think that. I think that was the word of the year in 2020 from Oxford. It was, I forget. Oh, now I forget. But it was during COVID, 2020 or 2021, and the word of the year. Maybe we'll look it up and we'll figure it out. But it was that emotional kind of feeling that then people misinterpret as fact. This sort of mutually supportive feeling, I think, is something like that. It's a scary concept. That people, well, in today's world, sometimes things on the internet are there just so you click it, so that it's intentionally false just to get the click because someone's getting paid on the other end for it. So yeah, how do you know what's real? From a Zen perspective, nothing's real. So that's actually the liberating, principle. So, nothing is, it's all delusion. Now that's going to be hard for many listeners, but the idea of Zen is that everything we perceive is delusion because it's just within our head. And so really you want to just experience what is. And so whatever's in front of you, you also don't want to put things in dichotomy of, truth or a lie. Okay, that's also hard. And especially if I'm investigating something and doing research, I'm looking for the truth, hopefully. But as we know, with any kind of research, there's going to be almost equal sides on equal evidence on both sides. That which I could prove, I could also disprove. But I think, I don't know if this was what you were referencing, but I think one of the most dangerous ones was vaccines. I think it was Jenny McCarthy or some kind of famous American, and kind of citing research that didn't exist, and the person lost their Nobel Peace Prize, was taken away. I mean, but to think that people do this, I guess this is what bridges my psychology background. I'm not that surprised in a way, because the human condition is flawed. People are flawed. And when people have power, they will often abuse it.
You talk about the mental health, and that's a big thing for what you're working on. And unfortunately, because, like just people that I'm working with, it's gone through the roof. There's some, like it's scary the amount of people that are suffering. And I think it was in Sweden, somebody was telling me recently, all of the kids, bar one, was seeing a psychologist.
Yeah.
And like, if I even look at, the news, thankfully people are turning away from the news and they're listening to podcasts, which is great. But even if you're listening to the radio, on the hour, every hour, and sometimes on the half hour, you get 5 minutes of negativity into your head. And it's like, you're just reaching as fast as you can to put on the CD or something like that. But like, you can understand it because it's just, and even on the social media, like originally social media was social that we can share pictures and just connect even better.
Yeah.
But even X and all, like people are saying, oh, that's so great. Yeah. That is the most negative thing I've seen in my life. That's worse than anything. And you go into it to post something and then you see somebody, and before you know it, you're looking at a thread of just horrible things, which in turn, that's why there's so much problems. Like, so like, you've obviously seen it increasing massively.
Yeah, it has increased massively. And I think part of it is we have more awareness and access, and it's less of a stigma. I think historically there were just these like hospitals for people and they were locked up in, rooms or in jackets or things of that nature. And so I'll blend this like meditation thing. So, the East has taught us that there's like a saying, what the West calls suffering is what the East calls living. So in the West, we're like, oh, I'm suffering, I need a psychologist, like da-da-da-da-da. And then the East interpretation is, well, that's living, and I don't mean to minimize mental health. Obviously, I'm a licensed psychologist, mental health is, struggles and diagnoses are real. And I do think that we've gotten a little sensitive or like hyper aware to some of the stuff where, not everyone in that Sweden area needs a psychologist. The first thing I think about when I meet with someone is my job is to not have a job. I don't want to be treating somebody all the time. What tools, what strategies are they utilizing, to then be able to kind of decrease whatever that suffering is. But you can't just come and like expect that there's going to be a magic wand. But all the things you said, news, access to information with, the internet, social media for sure. These apps are engineered and developed to addict us, and they're working. They are addicting us. And so I think those are all kind of real challenges that we're up against. That being said, in the sports world, sometimes like everything's like thrown at me, like, oh, this is mental health, or oh, this has to be fixed, or da-da-da-da. Like, no, like not everything is mental health. Like if, especially if it's a 20-year-old, 20-year-olds do stupid things, even a 25-year-old, like you give a kid who grew up in a, like in a really difficult background, and you sign him, to $20 million, he's going to do something stupid with that, like at some point, he's not going to do everything perfect. And so it's not just to label that as mental health. It's also it's just living.
You mentioned something very important there that basically you want to help them as fast as possible. Yeah. And it's something that annoys me because I have come across so many people that they're like, oh, my therapist is brilliant, I'm with him 10 years. Honestly, yeah. It's frustrating. Like, is there any institution, organization that's kind of watching this? Because there's people like you that are out there and actually want to help the person and make their life different. And there's others that just get them to regurgitate the story that they've got, have their little try, feel better and walk away and come back next week and they get their check. And it's horrible. But they probably think they're doing right because they've been in a system that's doing it. But is there any organization that's kind of watching this, that people out there who need the help or would appreciate help would know that they can go to the likes of you that's really there to help them, as opposed to the likes that wants to have a customer for life?
Yeah, it's a really good point. There's different camps of the approach to psychology. And so, while I am board certified in cognitive and behavioral therapy, that is the lens with which I'm going to approach the work. And that is an evidence-based practice that says thoughts, feelings, and behaviors interact. And there's always some sort of learning pattern that can be interrupted to create some peace. Okay, that's like that's the scholastic answer. in terms of oversight, in the United States, we have licenses, and so the jurisdiction is by state. But there are, types of therapy that are long term, and I'm not going to say that the 10-year, treatment is awful. I just myself would not recommend that for any of my family members, and so that's one of the gauges I use is sort of like, even if I hire someone, for a position to work with me, I always say, like, would I refer this person to a family member? Because I think that that's like my barometer that I use. If I had a loved one that was struggling with something and had been seeing a therapist for 10 years, yes, I would have a big problem with that in that example, because, now I will see people long-term, but these are usually executives or like high-performing folks that we just do like quarterly or like once or twice a year check-ins, so there's some maintenance that is involved.
Yeah, but like, I think that's a good thing for everything, because life is just constantly changing, and then you're just keeping up to date, and you're making sure that, you're not going to go off the balance like you did previously.
Exactly. So we get an annual physical for our physical health. We bring our cars in to get a checkup.
Like, that's what it's something that I would hope that we would do, that like mental and also body wise as well, that we're going in yearly and doing a test. But it's not like in America where like you have to remortgage the house. It should be done on a cheap level, because later on it's going to save something that you can cure it easy, whatever it is, or you're just watching it and taking the right vitamins and things like that. But obviously, society doesn't push that, but it would be beautiful to see something like that in life that was done, or in CT of the body.
You're preaching to the choir. So like, I love the way you're saying it. Yeah, I think that is the best practice if you can. And again, it's not, everyone has a space out there. Like, there's enough people suffering. And hey, if you're rich and you want to go talk to someone weekly and you can afford it, cool. Like, no one's going to tell you how to spend your money. But to your point, it is expensive, but well-being is expensive, to have this overall general wellness. Unfortunately, it can get expensive. It doesn't have to be, but, eating well, consuming like high quality sort of water or other things, depending on where we are in the world, it really might be expensive to have access to these things. But, you got to start somewhere, and, meditation is free.
Exactly. And I mean, we have to kind of work on ourselves. So, like, let's get to your book, because like, there's so many people, like, they think, yeah, I've tried meditation, mindfulness, it's not for me, it doesn't work. And I think you've kind of realized that, because if I look at it and go through it, obviously I'm at a different level, but I see that I would love to have had that at a young age, because it's like, ooh, I get it. And you've done it in it's like it's like a workbook, but I think that's the most important thing. It's not, because you can do this in little sections, go through a chapter, and you're moving along, and it's like, as if you apply it, you're better. So I suppose let's kind of like the reasoning behind it. You could see that, the existing systems weren't working. Is that why you decided to create this?
Yeah, I think there's like a misconception. I think even I remember when I first started like yoga, I was like, oh my God, I got 3 breaths without a thought. Like, I thought that was what I was trying to achieve. Which is like, thank you for laughing, because again, we know that today that's not the goal. And so, I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about what, mindfulness or meditation is. This book was very developmentally appropriate. I think part of that's because I work with these high performing athletes, and, they don't want to sit still. They don't want to accept where they are, because it's never good enough. Like, they're always trying to get to the next level. And so this was like, I was like, how can I break this down in a way that anyone can do it anywhere in the world, and just like one small step at a time, because that's really all that it takes. And so, I worked with the publisher, and we did it during COVID, actually. And allegedly it was like one of, if not the only kind of just general mindfulness workbook, because there's all the other mindfulness kind of workbooks were focused on a specific disorder or disease. And this was more global, like for anything you're doing, like for, being a homemaker, for being a CEO, for being an athlete, or for being, like a blue collar worker. This book can kind of like, you could access it no matter what it is that you're doing.
I think it was Dennis Waitley was the first that maybe it was going on a lot before, but he was bringing kind of the psychology into mindfulness, into sport, where visualize what you're doing. Is that something that you do with the people that you've worked with, and have they seen kind of better results based on what they've applied?
Yeah, I mean, visualization is always going to be a thing. But the way that I look at it, though, and I think you'll really understand this, is how could you visualize if you can't actually focus? And so to just like walk someone through a visualization of their performance is really a disservice if they don't have the foundation in understanding like mental control or meditation. Because a brain, I mean, I don't know, like how long do you think you could like focus on like one object, if you tried to meditate, even as somebody who meditates, it's hard because the brain's still going to wander, and that's just what the brain does. So if I think I'm going to do like a 4-minute visualization for, a mile, like let's say somebody who's running the mile, I can guarantee you that during those 4 minutes that they are not focused on just the visualization. Would you agree with me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of where I've dispelled visualization a little bit, because like if they don't have a meditative or mindfulness practice, then there's no point in visualization, in my opinion, because you're actually not focusing, and your body is not going to actually receive that information. So you just start at a smaller way, and I think also another way like to bridge the East and the West is like now I do some research with functional MRIs. So can we look at how the brain is changing as a result of some of these practices? I think that will give us a better, insight into ways that people could kind of focus or maybe use visualization. But I also remember as like a swimmer, they would bring someone in like right before championship meet to do visualization. And it wasn't hard for me, but like I would usually just fall asleep, like it was just kind of like a relaxation moment, but it was not visualization. So again, so that's my bias that I come to that, that world with. But there's lots of different, Eugene Gindlin also brought focusing. So there are like many sort of early on 80s people that were trying to understand how the brain would work. And I think that's what that is. And so it's a good thing, but you got to have a foundation first.
And you said functional MRA, because that was something that I'm conscious of as well, because usually they have the person lying down on a thing, and that's not your normal state. So they're basing everything based on you being like a statue. And the reality is you're actually moving and doing everything. And have they got devices so that can, as you're living everyday life, and I know it's kind of magnetic and it can be kind of dangerous. So can they really do it?
It's very dangerous, not kind of dangerous. Yeah. So no. So when we talk about functional MRI, we are maybe, you always want like a resting state kind of baseline, but then you could elicit some kind of emotional response or cognitive response to see what activity is there. That's where there's been some technology improvements. So if I'm laying there, I have a screen in front of me or some pictures or videos or something coming up. The way I think about it is how computers, once were. You once needed an entire room or auditorium to have one computer. That's how MRI machines are today. So I do think that technology will advance over time, but currently, it's really just laying down. We have other sort of biofeedback measures that could be used, but they're not taking pictures of like, internal aspects of the brain.
I know you talk about the 4 pillars, so you might let people know what exactly are the 4 pillars.
The 4 pillars of
in a behavior holistic strength.
Okay, I thought so.
Wellness.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just a way that I approach executive coaching. So working with a bunch of executives, and now I feel like also working with head coaches and coaches. There's the coaching staff for athletic teams, because it all trickles down. One of the things we get from organizational psychology, top down, bottom up. And so that is what makes for the strongest team. There has to be some cohesion that's coming from the top, but also from the bottom. You have to have buy-in around that. So the 4 pillars is like a structure that we try and do. It's a comprehensive approach to this, because there's no one size fits all. So if I'm leading, every finance or hedge fund company is different. Every tech company is different. Even though they might be doing something similar, the culture that has been created because the people within it is unique. So it's got to be comprehensive. That's, all that stuff. Well-being has to be a part of it, or wellness. tech has done a better job at this, that there's some sort of aspect of people's wellness. So is there like a refueling station where people can grab a couple snacks during the day, or coffee, or a quiet room? It's got to be strength based, so thinking about what are the strengths, like, not, there's flaws, like everything's flawed, so let's accept that, let's move on. But let's build upon strengths that people have. We want to identify the weaknesses, but also let's build the strengths. It's got to be behavioral, because I think everything is behaviorism. No matter what it is that we're doing, we are doing behaviorism. And so these are the things that kind of bring together this sort of like holistic approach. Lastly, it's got to be holistic. It's got to be values based. So it's not, you have a lot of like coaches in the sports world right now talking about how they want their staff to like, take time off, or go to their child's, birthday party, or, things that they would maybe not otherwise do, because they were so kind of committed. But that roundedness, that holistic approach does contribute and improve performance.
What about kind of incorporating AI into everything you've done? Is that something that you've looked at?
Say that again.
With AI.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not smart enough. Hopefully, you'll have a different, guest on who can talk about artificial intelligence. But I don't really get it. I think it's fascinating. I mean, I've seen it, build like PowerPoint presentations, and it's pretty cool. It's here to stay, so we have to learn how to like coexist with it. I think to your point earlier, like a lot of my colleagues in the professor world are anti it. I'm not anti anything really. I mean, maybe murder, but there's not much that I'm anti. Like, you have to just find a way that it fits, in your schema, in your worldview. So it's here to stay. There's some cool research with the virtual reality, to kind of help with some anxiety or trauma, panic. So as long as you use it, for you, I think there's some games that allow people to sort of explore identity. They could be whatever gender they want to be. They could be whatever sort of character they want to be. I think things like that could really help some people that are really struggling to connect. But it's got to be in mindfulness, we call it the middle path. It has to be moderation, because if I'm only socializing on the computer, then I'm missing something interpersonally. So I have to have like some kind of balance of like real life connection with this artificial connection.
And like the other thing is, it can be cloned, but I know it takes a lot of programming and double checking and everything. But I mean, with the likes of, yourself, reaching more people, and especially people that can afford it, that then it can be done, and obviously it has to be tested that it's not given the wrong information, but when it's done in the right way. But on the opposite side of it, then, like, I mean, I've checked with a lot of tough stuff, and Gemini, and ask questions of things that I'm 100% sure of, and it lied. So you have to be, and there's people that are the same thing like we talked earlier, there's people regurgitating things that they see from AI, and it's like, no. So you have to be careful. You're podcaster as well. I'm not sure if you're continuing it, but you were top 5%. So what's the name of it there?
East,
West, which is a cool name. Like, so it's just let us know a little bit about that, because the beauty of a podcast is each interview, is timeless.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and it made me think earlier when you said that, because I think so. Some people are gathering their information from podcasts, which is great, like you said, and they're often listening to something that aligns with their beliefs, so it could be just reinforcing their beliefs and maybe not expanding their knowledge. So I just want to give some space to that. When East meets West, Nikki Rubin and I, she is a West Coast psychologist, but we met on the East Coast. So it's a little triple or double entendre there around East and West. So what we do is we take Eastern spiritual practices and we integrate that into Western behavioral medicine. So there's this like real kind of blending. And so, we both are, cognitive and behavioral therapists, like psychologists. and with my Zen study, and she practices yoga, it just sort of made sense that we kind of blended this all together. And like I said, there's no topic that doesn't have some kind of behaviorism in it. So we talk about, racial identity and social justice, and we talk about, politics a little bit, or, dating or marriage or making friends as adults. We are still recording. I think the shout out you gave was that we have not released in quite some time. We started it during COVID when people had a little bit more flexibility in their schedule. She and I both admittedly, but season 5 is about to, or 4 or 5, 4, I think. Season 4 is about to drop. So we do have, we're going to start season 4 up shortly. And yeah, we're really excited, kind of to get that out there. To your point about AI and how we see When East Meets West, or this, even my book, the more people that have access to the information, the better. So no matter, especially because what we're doing is a science, again, there's an art, but a lot of the stuff we talk about is based in science. It is actual fact. It's mostly objective, but we of course own whatever it is as our opinion or subjective.
And just curious with yourself, because there was a therapist that was on with me previously. I'm not sure it was at the speaking podcast or the awakening, but they basically mentioned that, I think it was from 2016 with the elections. From that point on, people were coming, and that was the thing that was stressing them. And she said before that, never would that come up. And that now it's the topic. And I mean, it's not just America, because everybody in the world knows what's going on in America, but every single country has the same thing. It's all orchestrated, but it's causing confusion. And have you any advice for people that let that get to them? And I mean, even if I listen to like some of the bigger podcasts that I listen to, if it's Joe Rogan or Patrick Bet-David or what, that's all they're talking about, and sometimes they're brilliant guests and I learn stuff from it, and you kind of know what's going on in the world as well. But at the same time, when that's the topic of conversation, it's kind of sad, because you're giving your power to these people. Whereas I think you have to be sovereign and look after yourself. We were born free, and that's what I do. And I actually don't vote for it. I don't believe that I give my power to anybody else. But unfortunately, you see people, they're fighting in-house because of, you believe you're a Republican, they're Democrat, or whether it's conservative in the UK or whatever. It's the exact same. And I mean, you've obviously seen that, the increase in that. So have you any kind of advice for people not to be letting that get in the way of the household or with your friends or in the workplace? Because it's kind of like them and us.
Yeah, the them and the othering is really damaging. So, and that's just a term behaviorally of like the them and us. So that's never helpful. So the curiosity helps. Let me stay curious about this person's position. I love that you talked about your self-sovereignty. I think that's critical. Boundaries, so you have to have boundaries around how you're accessing the information. Because again, like you said, it is nonstop. Back in the day, I could only watch cartoons on Saturdays. Now you have cartoons all day long. You had to wait for the 6 o'clock news. Now you have news all day long. So you have to have boundaries around that, because otherwise, like you said, you could be inundated with that information. So I think just having boundaries, staying kind of curious, and just really learning as much as you can, because the last piece of it is nothing is black and white, and that at least in the U.S. is the problem. It's not just Republican or Democrat, and that's why we're so split. Because what we really find in contextual behaviorism is that everything is gray, and really you find peace in the gray. So you're trying to find the antithesis and the thesis, and as you synthesize those two things together, that's where you can bring some peace. So, I'm hopeful, but I think any of these areas of the world where we see challenges, it's usually one against another. South Korea, Palestine, Israel. We're not really throwing in a lot of thirds anywhere. It's a lot of sort of just two entities pit against each other, and that's really problematic.
And just finally, I mean, because if we look at all what we've been discussing, because the way the algorithms work, it's like it's reinforcing your belief system, so it keeps showing it to you, which in turn makes you think it's right. Plus, I mean, I don't use Google because, you know, when you kind of start looking, it's brave. I see brave. But what I've learned is rephrase your question, because if you ask, is something safe or and then just try to look at it from the opposite persons. And if we can get everybody just curious.
Yeah.
And like, I have friends that have a total different belief system, and I don't hold it against them. We laugh and we take the piss out of each other. And that's the way it should be. You know, it shouldn't be, I only have friends that believe what I believe in. And it's kind of, I suppose, that's the only way that we can move forward and just have, you know, love for ourselves and have compassion for ourselves and be mindful.
Yeah, I mean, how boring would it be if like everyone you experienced was exactly you? You know, like that's you know, you're great, but if it was just all a bunch of Roys, like, you know, I think diversity.
Yeah, all McDonald's would be gone, Big Pharma would be gone. Different worlds.
It'd be a different world, and so diversity is like, also that's been a weaponized term, and people have weaponized diversity, but diversity of thought, diversity of identity is really a powerful tool, you know, not necessarily to change anything, even though I think change occurs, but just to like have experience. In the East, we talk about yin and yang. And so everything has to be balanced in that way. So, you know, understanding that it's those differences that actually keep things whole. You know, you wouldn't want everyone to be the same, because then you're lopsided.
You know, I said it was that final one, but this is one that I'd love to kind of get the secret ingredient for me. It's like ego gets in the way. And it's like, especially with a lot of stuff that went on, there's like so much information that people then realize, ooh, I was duped, but they never put up their hand, or if they were attacking somebody based on their belief system. And it has to come down to the ego. Yeah. Is there any way of kind of just, I think it's just compassion for the person that you're not attacking them or something there, but there's no way to change that really. Is there? Have you any kind of thoughts on when a person like lets their ego block their process?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways for that. I think, you know, compassionate living is one way, like you mentioned compassion. So we haven't even talked about that today, but there's compassion-focused therapy. Compassion is a big part of, you know, Eastern tradition. But when ego is involved, which is sort of like a Western concept, you know, you have insight. And so that's where meditation comes in. So it's kind of funny because we did a summer internship for undergraduate students. So in the U.S. system, you know, undergraduate college, university, it's very hard for them to get experience in mental health or behavioral health because of all the licenses and you know, laws that kind of protect health information. So I can't bring like an intern with me to say, oh, I'm going to go meet Roy, my patient, you know, like you just can't do that. So we found ways to get more creative to have those opportunities. And two of the kids actually, like, part of their feedback was, you know, oh, like Dr. Pete was like so down to earth, and it's kind of crazy to think he was that down to earth, knowing like how much he's accomplished. You know, that's what they wrote. And I, you know, as I read that, I wasn't like patting myself on the back. I was like, well, that's meditation, you know, because, you know, and I was like, thank you, you know, for that gift of meditation, because I'm glad, A, that they perceived it that way, B, I'm doing kind of my life mission, and C, like, that's what life's about. You know, how do those kids are now empowered to kind of want to do this, versus I could have been, you know, more strict and less welcoming, and then, you know, because of ego, and then they're going to be turned off to it, you know. And so, and who does that serve, you know? And so the work of meditation, where it says like, there is no Dr. Pete, actually, like, it's, you know, it doesn't exist. You know, it's all an illusion.
Excellent. Listen, thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. You might let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, any social is official Dr. Pete. So check me out on everything across the board at official Dr. Pete, or When East Meets West, the podcast, and the Mindfulness Workbook for Beginners.
No, perfect. I'll make sure I put the link spot on the audio and the video. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that's all for the Speaking Podcast. You'll find other episodes on speakingpodcast.com. Be sure to comment, give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and let us know what you thought about everything we discussed. Doesn't matter if you disagree, as long as it's not abusive, it stays up. Until next week, take care. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you'll find my 6 podcasts on bio.link/podcaster. And also, if you'd like to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour, you'll find the information on that or on the QR code that's there. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and share with your friends because it really helps. Until next week, take care.